As you can see, today is a very special occasion because I am joined here by Chloe Skyweiser. And by here, I mean in Riga, in my home at your Impact House. Chloe, warm welcome. In just a moment, she'll introduce herself and tell you a little bit more about why she's here and what she's going to share about today. Um, but before we do that, um, warm welcome to everyone who's joined the live webinar. Today's topic is ESG Regulatory Landscape in 2024. We'll be looking at what are the main regulations and directives driving the businesses to change the way they operate in the context of ESG. And as we are getting started, I'll just do a short introduction to who I am and what I'm all about. So, for the last 2 years, I've been working as sustainability advisor at your Impact House. I worked with companies and investment funds that are just getting started with their sustainability journey. And prior to that, I've had the opportunity to work with a global manufacturing company called Printful and develop and launch their CSR strategy. Chloe, I am welcoming you to the stage. And
Wonderful. So my name is Chloe Skyweiser. I'm the founder of Cohemian Copy, and I'm an ESG consultant and communication strategist. I've been a copywriter for more than 6 years, working in various industries, including B2B SaaS, manufacturing, tech, e-commerce, and a lot more. And in general, my goal is to help businesses express their commitments to environmental and social responsibility in a way that's transparent, accountable, and authentic. And currently, I work with sustainability consultancies to help businesses write their ESG reports, as we know that's a really, really big moment for this. Back to you, Christina.
here I am. So today's agenda, in today's session, we'll cover all the main regulations and directives that business owners and sustainability leaders need to know about as they're building their business strategy and also ESG strategy. So in case any of the terms mentioned on the agenda, SFDR, CSRD, ESRS, bring you anxiety, we are here to help you figure out what are the key things that you need to know so you can successfully navigate this time of change. Let's get started. But before we do, I just want to mention that in case you're currently working on your ESG strategy or you're planning to do so in 2024, I have a resource that could be of help. I've brought together the brightest minds in sustainability and ESG to create a 6-week program to help sustainability managers develop an ESG strategy to learn the actual steps that they need to take to successfully lead the company through that journey. So if this could be of help, just ping me on LinkedIn. I'll share a special Impact House webinar community offer for you. And as we are getting into the content, we just have to start with the Green Deal. What is the Green Deal? The Green Deal is the very start of how EU announced its strategy to address climate change and achieve climate neutrality. The ultimate objective is to reach climate neutrality in Europe by 2050. And the midterm goal over here is to cut the greenhouse gas emissions by 55% by 2030 in comparison to 1990 levels. Just for scale, the Green Deal is a public investment plan of 1 trillion euros over the following 10 years. And that is going to be a massive investment, and it definitely sets the direction of where we actually are going as a continent. The idea is to achieve this massive ambition through three main focus areas. One, increasing the share of renewable energy in the EU energy mix. The second one is decoupling growth from resource exploitation, and happy to report that we're already seeing some significant progress in this in several industries. And the third part is we're fostering an inclusive green transition to create new jobs and leave no one behind. These are the three main focus areas for the EU's Green Deal. But probably if you haven't lived under the rock, you have heard some things about Green Deal already. It was announced in 2019, approved in January 2020, and as part of it, all EU countries are committed to achieving climate neutrality by 2050. That means that there are legislations that are legally binding countries to actually make the change happen, and also manage how the businesses that operate in their country also implement this change. The package includes policies covering the climate, environment, energy, transport, industry, agriculture, and also sustainable finance. And all of these policies and regulations are strongly interlinked. And here's what I mean by that. In today's webinar, we'll be focusing mostly on three sustainability regulations that have come after the EU Green Deal. And I want you to go away with an understanding of how they are interlinked and how they are built on top of each other and what that actually means for your business. So we'll start with the EU taxonomy. EU taxonomy is the backbone of EU Green Deal, as it answers the important question of what actually is green. If the activity is contributing to climate goals that are set out in EU taxonomy and does no significant harm to other climate goals that are set out in the EU taxonomy, it is considered sustainable, aka taxonomy aligned. The alignment of an activity is evaluated based on several criteria. It is a whole another document of procedures, of things that every company and now and also financial market participant and member state need to go through. So we're not going to go into that process in the technical details in this session, because that's probably not the focus point for you at the moment. But yeah, as I mentioned, it is already used now, and it is used by financial market participants that are in the scope of SFDR. It is also used by large companies that are in the scope of CSRD, and it is also used by EU member states. And everyone involved is using it to disclose how big is the part that is how big part of the economic activities are actually sustainable and taxonomy aligned. So let's look at the financial market first. After introduction of Green Deal and EU taxonomy, SFDR was launched. Since 2021, banks and investment funds that are part of the scope of this regulation are required to disclose information on their sustainability practices on a firm level and also their financial products. They need to disclose how they impact sustainability and what sustainability risks might impact them. This is important to know for any business that is up and running, because it's inevitable that you will have to work with financial market participants. You might be working with a bank, you might be working with a venture capital fund, you might be working with an insurance company, and all of them are currently regulated under this SFDR regulation. SFDR is also offering some classification of funds, like a system for us to figure out which of the funds are prioritizing sustainability and for which ones it's not so important. So the dark green funds are actually the ones who have sustainable investment as their primary objective. Light green funds, they can promote environmental and social characteristics, but they may not have sustainability as their central goal. And gray funds, these funds neither prioritize or promote environmental and social characteristics. So as a business owner, I would suggest to consider which business partners you work with, because in case you are gonna fundraise from a dark green fund, it would actually mean that you will need to do a lot more reporting and proving that you're actually creating the positive impact that you are stating. The reporting requirements for dark green funds are the most complex ones, as they essentially need to prove that they're actually dark green. On the other side of the equation of EU taxonomy is CSRD. Um, it is currently the EU's most recent legislative framework. The Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive requires companies to publish regular reports on their ESG performance using ESRS. The good news is that the next speaker, Chloe, will walk you through the general idea and the key things that you should know about and keep in mind about ESRS. But before we go into like more practical details, I just want to point out the current reality of how important CSRD is becoming. CSRD is currently being incorporated in EU country national laws. This is a process that should be completed by EU member states by July 2024. For example, France is the first EU member state that has already incorporated this directive into its national law. And the country has introduced penalties associated with failure to comply. Specifically, the penalty includes a fine up to 75,000 euros and a jail time of up to 5 years for the company director in the case the company hinders the external auditor's ability to certify the CSRD report. There are also fines associated with the company not submitting a report to the external auditor, and that can result in a jail time of 2 years. So this is the example of where this is heading. Let's see how this how is it integrated in other country national laws, and we'll see it unfold in the next few months. And the other thing I want to mention before we go any further is that CSRD does not apply to every company in the EU. But even though that is the case, it doesn't mean that you don't care about it, because it is important that you understand what is CSRD so that you can actually consider these things when you are approaching new business partners, when you're selling your services or selling your products. Because, as mentioned, big companies will need to start reporting their positive impact and negative impact on society and environment. They'll need to evaluate how these factors impact their company, and they'll also have to set targets for improving their performance over time. So who does it apply to? CSRD applies to large public interest companies with 500 plus employees that so far have reported in line with NFRD. These are listed companies, banks, insurance companies. The second group that CSRD applies to are large businesses that meet at least 2/3 of the following criteria. They have over 250 employees, they have over 50 million net turnover, or they have over 25 million balance sheet total. And the third group companies that are listed in EU regulated markets. This has some exceptions, as you can also see on the slide, but generally speaking, this is shaping where the market leaders are going, and this is something that all market players will have to familiarize themselves with. What are the main requirements of CSRD? First, companies will need to evaluate which ESG topics to report on through double materiality assessment. They'll need to set targets, have a baseline, and report the progress over time. They'll need to submit the report on this progress in electronic format, XBRL, and they'll also need to make sure that the report has assurance statement by an external auditor. So this will take time. This is a massive change in how we are doing business. But there is so much more to be said around CSRD, and I will be welcoming on stage Chloe.
Hey everyone, I'm really excited to be here. Thanks so much for giving us that intro, Christina. And I'm going to take you through ESRS, which is a key standard as part of reporting on ESG for CSRD, as well as talking a little bit about the EU Green Claims Directive afterwards. So what is ESRS? This stands for the European Sustainability Reporting Standards. It's under CSRD, part of it for non-financial reporting. So many companies release annual reports that includes information about their financial performance, and that has been for many years. But at this time, a lot of companies are adding extra information about their specific sustainability performance. And of course, that has the 3 ESG factors, environmental, social, and governance incorporated in it. And this creates a new standard for ESG reporting. We have a lot of frameworks that I'm going to mention a couple in a minute, including ISSB and GRI that you might be familiar with. But this new standard is specific to EU businesses, but not just businesses that are located in the EU, but businesses that are active in EU markets. So it has an even wider reach than just businesses in the EU. I think the last figures that I saw is that it might affect up to 10,000 companies that are headquartered outside of the EU, but active in EU markets. And ESRS, as well as part of CSRD, represents a part of a larger global move towards standardization. So it means that stakeholders can have a better comparison between ESG reports. And ESRS as a standard is trying to create a common language between reports that provides better transparency for stakeholders, including employees, investors, customers, suppliers, and more. There are a number of key factors of ESRS that I'll go over now. As I mentioned just a moment ago, they're separate from financial disclosures, which could be included in annual reports. So until now, some companies have included their sustainability performance as part of their annual reports. But now that CSRD is becoming a reality, with the first reports being required next year in 2025, it is necessary to publish a report that's specific to your sustainability performance. In addition to that, double materiality is a required part of ESRS as a standard. So what exactly is double materiality? Materiality is a process that companies go through to determine what topics and ESG factors are relevant to their operations as a business. And it has 2 perspectives. Now, there can be single materiality and double materiality. The factors that can be involved are an inside-out perspective. That basically means from the company outward, what kind of impacts does the company have on the environment and society? And there's also the outside-in perspective. So what factors that can be outside of the company's control, like geopolitical conflict, supply chain, and so on, how does those affect the operations of the company? So single materiality will only take one of those perspectives. Typically, it's the outside in perspective because it's about how ESG factors might be affecting the company's ability to perform and make money. And that's something that investors are very interested in. But double materiality takes both of those perspectives. So you are taking into consideration how a company impacts the outside world, as well as how the outside world impacts the company when determining what ESG factors are material or, again, relevant to the company for the purposes of reporting. So we know that double materiality is required. And as Christina mentioned, these reports must also be third-party audited so that stakeholders can have more confidence in the information that you're reporting. And finally, one big change with ESRS is that it is considered a standard, not a framework. There are a lot of different frameworks that exist so far for voluntary ESG reporting, like ISSB and GRI. But these frameworks, again, voluntary, while ESRS under CSRD is mandatory. So companies that meet the criteria for CSRD, as Christina laid out, must report on their sustainability performance. As a result of this, other frameworks are working to align themselves with ESRS. And this has given rise to the concept of interoperability. So it means that some of these frameworks already have elements in common with ESRS. And of course, they share goals in terms of helping and enabling companies to share information about their performance. So what does this interoperability look like in practice? We know about the Global Reporting Initiative, or GRI. Worldwide, that's the most popular framework so far. And whereas GRI started with a single materiality perspective, it has moved in recent years towards double materiality, where some companies may need to redo their materiality assessment to determine the ESG factors that are relevant to them. Other companies may have recently performed a double materiality assessment and could be in a good place to start reporting with ESRS starting next year. There's also the ISSB, or International Sustainability Reporting Standards. Their goal is to create a sort of global baseline for reporting, but it has the outside in perspective that's more investment focused so far. However, both of these standards, which can be also built on other frameworks like SASB, which you might have heard of, they are already getting to work on interoperability indexes, which can help you see if you have already been reporting using one or other of the frameworks, where they already have some overlap with ESRS, making it a little bit easier for companies to shift into reporting using the ESRS. So in terms of implementing reporting with ESRS, there are a couple of phases. The first phase is already starting now. So companies, large companies that fit 2 out of 3 of the financial criteria that Christina laid out, need to start collecting data from fiscal year 2024, already started right now, to publish their first report in 2025. So as you can see, this is super relevant maybe for some people watching. But there's also a second phase, which involves small and medium enterprises, SMEs, that are public or listed on the stock market. And these are required to start reporting from 2026, although it is possible to opt out until 2028. If you fall under this category, I would encourage you to consider the landscape, because even though, as we mentioned, ESRS is mandatory, there is still room now for companies to become kind of early adopters. And of course, there is something positive reputationally to reporting when it may not be mandatory for you yet. So it's something to consider, especially since the organization EFRAG, which is developing the ESRS, they are also taking into consideration SMEs that may not be required to report under ESRS at all. But for example, they may be getting informational requests from their investors or their suppliers, stakeholders that are interested in their sustainability performance, so that they don't need to report as strictly as companies that are required under ESRS, but they're creating a sort of simpler, more voluntary level of standards so that these non-listed SMEs can also report as soon as those standards are released. So there are some main ESRS focus points. It's expected to be a lot more granular than pre-existing frameworks at the moment. There are going to be a stronger focus on metrics and targets, on sustainability due diligence, so companies taking into consideration what kind of impact their actions will have on the environment and society before they take those actions, but also a stronger focus on the value chain, upstream factors, for example, business travel, employee commuting, and other things, as well as downstream impacts that would be transportation and distribution of your products and services, as well as the use phase and end of life recycling, or how your products can fit back into a circular economy. There are 12 criteria under ESRS. 2 of them are general, 5 are environmental, 4 are social, and 1 is related to governance. And as you'll see in just a moment, I'm going to really quickly go through these criteria, that many of them are interconnected. So even though they have a whole set of criteria for disclosures, many of these disclosures have a lot of overlap. So in terms of the general requirements, we have ESRS 1. This is just laying out the approach to disclosures. ESRS 2 I have a lot of experience, for example, using the GRI framework. And if you are familiar with that, you may also be familiar with this approach to general disclosures. This is cutting across all ESG factors, and it's related to, for example, governance processes, like information about your supervisory board or employee representation in the company, your strategy and business model, impact, risk, and opportunity management, as well as performance metrics and targets. And that's really just the beginning. Then we get into the specific ESG criteria. First of all, environment. So this one has 5 umbrella topics, materiality topics, that companies will determine if they're relevant to them or not. The first one is the climate. So some of the disclosures here might be related to climate change mitigation or reducing emissions, which a lot of companies are already starting to measure across scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. Then we have pollution. So these are disclosures related to ways that companies might be polluting air, water, or soil. We have water and marine resources. This is related to things like microplastics or wastewater, how are companies handling those things, or perhaps cleaning up after themselves to preserve these resources. ESRS E4, biodiversity and ecosystems. This is connected to things like deforestation, habitat loss, and essentially the impact of a company's actions on flora and fauna. And this might be relevant, for example, to the way that a chocolate company may impact rainforest, for example. Finally, we have E5 that's related to resource use and circular economy. So things like recycled content, durability, how can a product be reused, or do you have a take back program at the end of your life? It's really important to note, for example, that whereas with the voluntary frameworks, companies could have a little bit of freedom in terms of what material topics they needed to report on. So if a company determined that circular economy wasn't relevant to them at the moment, they didn't necessarily need to include it. But with ESRS, those principles are a lot more strict. So essentially, there is an expectation that companies will report on all topics that are material or relevant to them, and they need to provide a detailed explanation if they determine that a topic is not relevant. This is especially important when it's connected with the climate. That's the first environmental criteria, because it's expected that almost all companies have some impact on climate and that create emissions. So keep in mind that you may need to justify if you leave one of these material topics out. Let's briefly go through the social criteria. So S1 is own workforce. That's connected with your employees, for example, disclosures related to worker satisfaction and safety. S2, workers in the value chain. This is talking about whether you provide a fair wage, how your company approaches human rights, for example. S3 is connected with affected communities. So essentially, the way that your products and services or your operations are affecting communities around you. And S for consumers and end users. So for example, what kind of safety specifications does your product or service have? What kind of mechanisms do consumers have to share complaints with you? Finally, the governance criteria. And just because there's only one category of this doesn't make it any less important because it's very deeply connected with other criteria. So G1 is business conduct. That's connected with your corporate culture. For example, what processes do you have in place to prevent corruption or bribery? Or what kind of lobbying does your company carry out? Those are just a couple examples, but there are a few examples of the disclosures you might need to do. Now, with a quick eye on the time, I'm going to go through this section briefly, but all of this is related to how a company reports on its sustainability performance, but how are companies actually communicating their ESG initiatives? Let's talk briefly about the EU Green Claims Directive. In the past year, when the EU Commission released a report about that it had done assessing green claims that it found across EU member states, it didn't find very positive results, let's say. Essentially, that there are a lot of claims that companies make that could be considered to be false, misleading, or exaggerated. And we turned our attention to how to prevent greenwashing language and claims. Is it possible for the EU to outlaw greenwashing? That's still something that we're waiting to see. But the landscape right now is that the proposal for the EU Green Claims Directive was recently adopted just on January 17th. And now EU member states have 2 years to implement the principles laid out in the EU Green Claims Directive. So, for example, what must companies do and what can companies not do now that the EU Green Claims Directive is in force? Companies must, for example, use verifiable sustainability certifications in labeling. As I'm going to show in a moment, it's not enough simply to write sustainable, eco-friendly, natural, non-toxic on your product. However, this must be backed up by accepted certification schemes. Companies have to make their targets publicly available. We can see a parallel with the ESRS here, which is that greater transparency than ever is being expected. Companies must also have a detailed and realistic implementation plan. So again, if you say that you expect to reduce your emission by X% by 2030, how are you actually going to achieve that? On the other hand, what can't companies do with the EU Green Claims Directive? So for example, as mentioned, they can't use terms like eco-friendly, natural, biodegradable, climate neutral. That's kind of a controversial one. And it's not that you can't use these terms, but specifically that you cannot use the terms without evidence. So if you plan to make any of these claims, you need to be able to back it up. It's also not possible under the Green Claims Directive to use carbon offsetting schemes to substantiate your claims starting from 2026. So a lot of companies will try to reduce their emissions, but they will offset the remaining emissions and become certified, for example, as carbon neutral. The Commission has found that customers don't typically understand what this means. They are more likely potentially to buy a product or service considered climate neutral, even though they are not aware, for example, that this involves offsetting schemes, and it promotes a level of trust that may be misleading. Finally, you should avoid using so-called green images. That means using green or brown to suggest sustainable when a product is not actually sustainable, or when it comes to food service providers, to use happy animals to suggest responsible when, for example, you may be engaging in, maybe sourcing your products from conventional farming practices or factory farming. Why is the Green Claims Directive such a big part of our conscious right now? So, as you know, maybe the people watching this, you're part of a company, perhaps you have to do with marketing or operations, but you're also a consumer. Everybody buys and consumes products and services. And the world is increasingly globalized. It's easier than ever to get something like coconut oil or an exotic nut or wine that you might not be able to just living in the country where you live. That means it's a lot harder to understand in our globalized world what kind of materials are safe, what products are ethical or sustainable, what products can we consume that support our own environmental goals, like not having a harsh impact on the environment. So the Green Claims Directive is part of the effort from the EU to bring integrity into marketing and consumer relationships, making sure that any claims that you make are solidly backed up by evidence so that overall we can build a higher level of consumer trust. There are a few things you should consider. Every place that you might make a green claim, from your product descriptions to your packaging, your social media and all marketing channels, as well as your ads. That means both online ads, for example, through Google Ads, ads that might display on social media, as well as your offline ads that has to do with billboards or any product brochures that you might hand out. And finally, what kind of PR you have around your product and services. What are the senior levels of your company saying in interviews about your products? Make sure that everybody is on the same page in terms of the claims that are being made. For the purposes of time, I'm just going to skip ahead to my main takeaways so that we can all let you go on time. It's really important to consider that even though at the offset, the Green Claims Initiative seems to represent a limitation on companies, but the main aim of it is positive. Its goal is to create more trust and an economy of information that consumers can use to align their purchases and their lives with their own sustainability goals. So, as a fellow marketer, I would encourage you, let's all together take responsibility for the communications and claims that we're putting out there about our products and services. And let's try to create a communications universe that is more informative rather than confusing, as unfortunately it has found to be now. It's definitely within our power to do this. It's just about taking a little bit of initiative and always asking critical questions about things that we're claiming about our products and services. I hope this was super helpful and informative for you. I will bring Christina back just to take us out.
Thank you, Chloe. This was really informative. And I also took few notes for myself that I'll use in the next few months as I'm also exploring and learning and following all the new regulations that are shaping the business environment here in Europe. Thank you so much for coming over to Riga, for joining me on this live stream. And I look forward to the next steps of this new and exciting journey of more sustainable Europe. Thank you, everyone who joined us live. Thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of the day. Take care. Bye.